What if I told you that the engine that powered Europe for decades is on the verge of breaking down? Germany, the continent's largest economy and the backbone of the European Union, is now facing what could be the beginning of a historic turning point. The country that built its reputation on discipline, strong exports, and industrial innovation now finds itself in a scenario few would have imagined. Factories threatened with closure, a prolonged recession, and millions of workers left without prospects. According to the International Monetary Fund, Germany's gross domestic product has shrunk by more than $200 billion since 2022, a brutal fall for a nation that once thrived on trade surpluses of more than $200 billion a year. What happens when the engine of Europe begins to stall? Volkswagen, a symbol of industrial might, is already considering shutting down production lines in Germany for the first time in 87 years, as reported by Reuters in 2024. At the same time, more than 3 million citizens face unemployment, according to the Federal Employment Agency. The fiscal discipline that was once Germany's pride, enshrined in the so-called debt break of 2009, has now become a straitjacket in the middle of crisis. How can the economy be sustained without borrowing when the very growth model appears to be collapsing? And it was in this context that Berlin decided to break with its own tradition. In March 2025, it announced an extraordinary €500 billion package, equal to 15% of its entire economy. It is the largest gamble in its modern history, a maneuver that could either reignite confidence and restore competitiveness or accelerate its decline, undermining not only Germany's credibility, but also the stability of the entire European Union. This is the turning point. A country known for never spending more than it collects has now decided to risk everything in the name of survival. What truly pushed Germany to this dramatic moment? And how far can this strategy go in saving Europe, or dragging it into an even deeper collapse? To understand this crossroads, we need to go back to the beginning, to the economic model that turned Germany into a global power and that now threatens to become its greatest weakness. When we think about economic growth, we usually imagine countries reinventing themselves, shifting from manufacturing to services, from industry to finance, from factory floors to office towers. But Germany followed a different path, and it was precisely that which made it unique. While nations like the United States and the United Kingdom built their futures on banks, technology, and consulting, Berlin doubled down on what it knew best: manufacturing. Not only manufacturing, but exporting at a global scale. According to the World Bank, nearly 50% of Germany's entire gross domestic product comes from exports, 3 times more than the United States and well above the European average. It's an impressive statistic, but also a warning. Relying so heavily on external buyers is like building a castle on land you don't own. Think of Wolfsburg, a city that embodies this model. There, more than 60,000 people work daily at the largest car factory on Earth, where nearly 1 million vehicles roll off the production line each year. This single complex produces more cars than entire countries like the United Kingdom or Italy. And the impact goes far beyond numbers. For every worker inside the plant, dozens of indirect jobs sustain the local economy, from restaurants to schools. Imagine what would happen if a gear of this magnitude stopped turning. This model brought prosperity. Germany became responsible for more than a quarter of all European manufacturing, accumulating surpluses that filled government coffers and funded public policy. For years, it seemed like the perfect formula. Companies made profits, workers enjoyed stable jobs, and the state collected revenue without borrowing. But every formula carries a hidden fragility. And here comes the inevitable question. What happens when buyers vanish, when trade partners face crises of their own, or when new powers flood markets with cheaper goods? The truth is that German strength has always relied on external demand. In an increasingly unstable world, the risks of this model grow more obvious every year. For the viewer watching right now, think of your own daily life. If your job depends on foreign clients, every global crisis impacts your paycheck, your energy bill, even the price of the car you drive. That's exactly what happens to an entire nation when it builds its wealth on exports. And here lies the central point. The model that made Germany a powerhouse could also become its fatal weakness. The gear that drove Europe may now be spinning faster than the country can control. If you want to understand how this apparent fortress began to crack and why it directly affects your own life, subscribe to Tellnomics and like this video. What comes next will show how a single historic decision changed Germany's economic destiny forever. At the height of its confidence, Germany decided to turn discipline into law. In 2009, the country passed the so-called debt break, a constitutional amendment that capped public borrowing at no more than 0.35% of gross domestic product per year. To put it in perspective, the United States often borrows more than 5% of GDP annually, over 10 times Germany's ceiling, according to the International Monetary Fund. This move cemented Germany's reputation as the guardian of fiscal responsibility, a beacon of trust for investors and creditors. But the question echoing today is simple. Did such rigid discipline ultimately become a trap? The following decade seemed to vindicate the policy. Between 2010 and 2019, the German economy grew nearly 25%, outperforming most of its European neighbors, according to the European Central Bank. Unemployment fell below 5%, while trade surpluses soared beyond $200 billion annually, more than any other nation on Earth, according to the World Trade Organization. Germany became synonymous with reliability, punctual trains, precision-engineered cars, and an almost perfect economic model. But every story of perfection hides a shadow. What happens when absolute order collides with unexpected chaos? The shock came in 2020 when the pandemic froze global trade. German exports plunged about 10% in just a few months, the equivalent of more than $100 billion evaporating from the system, according to Eurostat. For the first time since World War II, the gear that once turned with mechanical precision stopped. Gross domestic product shrank nearly 5%, the worst performance in more than 70 years. In that moment, the rigidity of the debt brake revealed itself as a burden. While other powers poured trillions into their economies, Berlin found itself shackled by its own rule. And here emerges the micro-conflict: how to reconcile the image of fiscal prudence with the desperate need to spend in order to survive. How far does discipline protect a country, and when does it begin to destroy it from within? Germany didn't yet know it, but the pandemic was only the first tremor. The second shock would come with the war in Ukraine, and this time survival would require rethinking its entire industrial and energy base. Imagine an industrial nation that depends on cheap energy to keep its factories, steel mills, and chemical plants alive. Now imagine that nation suddenly losing more than half of that energy overnight. That's exactly what happened to Germany after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Until then, 55% of Germany's natural gas came directly from Russia, according to the International Energy Agency. Within weeks, that supply fell by 90%. The impact was immediate. Electricity bills soared by more than 35%. Entire factories shut down not for lack of orders, but because they simply couldn't afford to keep the lights on. According to Eurostat, in 2024 alone, the German economy shrank by more than $200 billion, 6 times the entire federal health budget. The auto industry, the nation's pride, collapsed to output levels unseen since the 2008 financial crisis. Meanwhile, society faced another shock. More than 3 million unemployed people. Even global giants like BASF, the world's largest chemical company, announced production cuts inside Germany and plans to invest more in countries like China and the United States, where energy was cheaper and more stable. But Germany was not just facing an economic crisis. It was staring at an existential dilemma. How can you sustain an export-based model when the very energy supply that fuels industry is gone? And at that point, another threat loomed. The United States began pressing Berlin with 15% tariffs on German goods, a blow that could cost more than 20 billion euros annually, according to Bloomberg. All of this called into question the very survival of the German model. How can a nation withstand an unprecedented energy crisis, devastating foreign tariffs, and mounting pressure to ramp up military spending? Cornered, Germany did the unthinkable. It tore up its most sacred rule and unleashed the largest spending package in its history. But is €500 billion salvation, or the prelude to an even greater disaster? In March 2025, Germany crossed the line it once swore never to cross. For the first time since enacting the debt brake in 2009, Berlin announced an extraordinary spending package, €500 billion, equal to 15% of its entire economy. For a nation that built its identity on balanced budgets, this decision struck like a political and economic earthquake. The goal was clear: rescue collapsing industries, modernize crumbling infrastructure, and accelerate the energy transition amid supply shortages. But could this historic leap really change the game? According to estimates by the European Commission, such an investment could create more than 1 million new jobs and return GDP to positive growth within 2 years. Part of the funds targeted public works such as expanding high-speed rail and repairing bridges, more than 36% of which the Transport Ministry classified as critical. Another large portion was channeled into the Climate and Transformation Fund, with projects in solar and wind energy that could, in theory, cut industrial electricity costs by up to 20% by 2030. But the dilemma is brutal. While promises look to the future, present pressures won't wait. The package comes just as the United States threatens new tariffs of 15% on German products, a measure that could wipe out more than 20 billion euros in exports every year, according to Bloomberg. At the same time, Washington demands that Berlin raise defense spending to 5% of GDP, a level nearly impossible to reach without exploding public finances. Here lies the micro-conflict. Germany is betting everything on long-term projects, but faces immediate risks that could drain resources before the first results appear. Is this half-trillion package really a salvation, or just a temporary reprieve, pushing the crisis further down the road? The problem is that Germany doesn't play alone. Carrying the European Union on its shoulders, every move Berlin makes reverberates in Rome, Madrid, and Athens. If confidence in Germany collapses, it could drag down the entire continent. And what if the stability of a whole monetary union depended on the strength of just one nation? That has been Germany's role for decades, the silent guarantor of Europe. Whenever economies like Italy, Spain, or Greece neared collapse, investors stayed calm because they believed Berlin would step in. The trust was never really in Rome or Athens. It was in Berlin's solidity. Now, with €500 billion in new spending, that trust begins to erode. Recent reports from the Financial Times show foreign investors already reducing exposure to German bonds, while agencies like Fitch warn of potential credit downgrades. The investment package includes €300 billion in infrastructure, such as high-speed rail lines connecting Munich, Frankfurt, and Hamburg, along with the repair of thousands of aging bridges. Yet the Transport Ministry reports that more than 36% of those bridges are in critical condition, while only 30% of German territory has high-speed internet coverage, less than half the EU average. Meanwhile, the Climate and Transformation Fund channels €100 billion into clean energy projects, North Sea wind farms generating 6 terawatt-hours a year, and a 5-fold expansion of solar capacity by 2030. But all these gains take time. The Bundesbank admits the effects won't be felt until 2027. Until then, the bill comes due too soon. About €40 billion a year in interest payments alone, nearly equal to the entire national education budget. And if interest rates rise by just 2%, that burden could jump another €25 billion annually, according to central bank calculations. The dilemma intensifies. Invest now to reap benefits later, or watch markets crush the strategy before it has time to mature. The German gear is under immense pressure, and each passing month without visible returns fuels greater distrust. The issue is time, and time is precisely what Germany may not have. If projects fall behind schedule, the debt load could become unbearable. But if they succeed, the country could reshape not only its own economy, but the direction of all Europe. What's at stake goes far beyond a spending package. It's the redefinition of an economic model that sustained Germany for more than 70 years. Until now, the logic was clear. Keep public debt low, let the private sector lead growth, and use exports as the engine of prosperity. That formula made Germany one of the world's wealthiest nations, with a GDP of more than $4 trillion in 2023, according to the International Monetary Fund. But it also left the country vulnerable to external shocks it could not control. Now, by betting €500 billion of state spending, Berlin is trying to turn the page on its own history. The question is whether the state can replace the private engine in a highly developed country. History offers clues. After World War II, Japan allocated nearly 1/3 of its budget to rebuilding infrastructure, fueling 2 decades of growth at nearly 9% a year. But today's Germany is not 1950s Japan. It is a mature economy where each new road or factory yields only marginal gains. The Bundesbank projects that the real impacts of these investments will only be visible by 2027. By then, debt interest alone will already consume €40 billion annually, almost the same as the education budget. The dilemma is stark. If the projects succeed, they could restore confidence, create millions of jobs, and reposition Germany as Europe's engine. If they fail, markets will punish mercilessly, costs will explode, and credibility that took generations to build could vanish in just a few years. And it's not just about Germany. The fate of Rome, Madrid, and Athens, as well as the stability of the entire European Union, depends on Berlin's solidity. We are facing a global test. Can massive state intervention still revive growth in rich countries, or is this the end of the era of government-led economic miracles? Whatever happens in Germany will not remain confined to Europe. It will serve as a reference for the entire world. If you want to follow how this billion-euro gamble will redefine not only Germany, but also Europe's economic future, subscribe to Tellnomics, like, and share this video. Your support keeps this channel alive to bring deep, independent analysis. Thank you for staying with us until the end. And remember, the story of the global economy is being written right now, and you are part of it.